It starts with the quiet hum of a museum after dark, a muffled thud of wood settling, the faint rub of cloth against glass. In a corner of the Warren Occult Museum, a single glass cabinet stands out, stark warning etched onto its surface. Positively, do not open. Inside, under a soft light, sits a doll. Then, suddenly, it's August 2020. A rumor ignites social media, a digital wildfire spreading with impossible speed. Annabelle has escaped. For a strange, electric moment, the world held its breath, captivated by the absurd idea that a simple doll could break free and unleash chaos. It was a global jolt, a modern myth born from a hashtag. But to understand why, we have to go back before the internet, before the movies, to where the real story began. Rewind to 1970. The air in a cramped apartment near Hartford, Connecticut, is thick with the smell of antiseptic clinging to nursing uniforms and the lingering scent of instant coffee. This is home for Donna and Angie, two nursing students navigating the exhaustion of night shifts and the anxiety of student loans. Their world is one of rational thought, medical charts, and shared dreams pinned to the wall with Polaroids next to a worn, second-hand couch. It's into this grounded, ordinary life that the doll arrives. A gift from Donna's mother, a classic Raggedy Ann, meant to be a cheerful, comforting presence for a daughter working late into the night. It was just a doll, a piece of stitched fabric and yarn hair, a token of a mother's love. At first, that's all it was. The anomalies began as gentle, almost unnoticeable whispers of strangeness. A misplaced arm bent at an angle they didn't leave it in. The doll, left on the couch, would be found sitting upright on a chair in the other room. Donna and Angie, trained in logic and observation, brushed it off. Maybe one of them moved it and forgot. Maybe it just shifted. But then came the notes. Small slips of parchment paper, a kind neither of them owned, began appearing around the apartment. On them, in a shaky, childlike scrawl, were the words, "Help me." They searched for a rational explanation, a prankster neighbor, a forgotten detail. The unease, however, began to curdle into a quiet dread. A tiny smear of something reddish appeared on the back of the doll's hand, a substance they couldn't identify or explain away. Their attempts to rationalize were met with a growing sense of the uncanny. A friend they confided in laughed at first, suggesting they were just overtired. But as the notes continued to appear, his laughter faded, replaced by a tense silence. Lou, a close friend who was fiercely protective of the two women, was convinced it was an elaborate, cruel prank. He hated the doll on sight, feeling an inexplicable malevolence from its button eyes. He'd tell them to get rid of it, but Donna, compassionate by nature, felt a strange sense of pity. What if something was truly attached to it? What if it needed help? Lou's skepticism hardened into a chilling suspicion. He couldn't shake the feeling that whenever he was in the apartment, the doll's head was slightly turned, its gaze fixed directly on him. The doll was watching. The atmosphere in the small apartment began to thicken with an unspoken fear. The quiet of the night was no longer peaceful. It was punctuated by phantom sounds, faint footsteps that would shuffle down the hallway and stop just outside a bedroom door. Sometimes, when lying in bed, one of them would feel the distinct impression of small knees pressing into the mattress, as if a child had just knelt beside them. Cold spots would materialize in the middle of a room, raising goosebumps in the warm, stuffy air. The dread was no longer a whisper. It was a heartbeat thrumming in the walls. One night, Lou, staying over on the couch to make the women feel safer, woke with a start in the suffocating darkness. He couldn't move. An immense, invisible weight was pressing down on his chest, pinning him to the cushions, stealing his breath. His eyes darted around the moonlit room, searching for a source, for an intruder. And then he saw it. In the corner, the doll was gone from the chair where he'd last seen it. A flicker of movement near the foot of the couch caught his eye. The doll was there, on the floor, its head tilted, seemingly staring right at him. The weight on his chest intensified, a crushing force that felt chillingly, horribly real. He opened his mouth, his lungs burning, a scream building in his throat. Lou wakes up, but he can't move. He's pinned to the bed, a leaden weight pressing down on his chest, his limbs locked in place. He tries to scream, but the air catches in his throat, a dry, rasping sound. His eyes dart around the room, desperately searching, and that's when he sees it. The doll. It's at the foot of his bed, slowly, impossibly, climbing up his leg. He can feel the fabric of its dress against his skin, the cold plastic of its hands. It reaches his chest, stops, and then its hands are around his neck. He feels the faint tickle of a thread, a horrifying, delicate pressure. Panic floods him, a metallic taste in his mouth. He's suffocating. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, he breaks free, gasping, scrambling upright. His chest burns. He rips his shirt open. Across his torso are 7 distinct claw marks. They look like scratches, raw and red, burning as if seared into his skin. Donna would later say the marks were undeniable, but strangely, within 2 days, they vanished completely, leaving no scar, no trace. This was the final straw. The pranks, the notes, the displaced doll, that could all be explained away. But a physical attack, something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, Donna and Angie decide they need help from someone who understands the paranormal. They contact a medium. The seance is held in their small apartment. The air thick with anticipation. The medium makes contact almost immediately. The spirit identifies itself as a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. She explains that she was only 7 years old when her life ended tragically on the property where the apartment complex now stood. She's a lost, lonely soul, she says. She feels a connection to the girls and the doll, a sense of comfort. She doesn't want to cause harm. She just wants to be loved. She wants to stay. The explanation washes over Donna and Angie with a complicated sense of relief. It's not a malicious entity, just a child spirit. It's sad, not scary. Their sympathy overrides their fear. And then comes the pivotal moment, the one that changes everything. The medium asks if the spirit can have permission to inhabit the doll, to stay with them. Compassionately, believing they are helping a lonely child, Donna agrees. Yes, she says, you can stay. The words hang in the air, heavy with unspoken consequences. After the seance, the activity doesn't stop. It escalates. The doll, which they had named Annabelle in honor of the spirit, would be found in different rooms, in different positions. Once, they found it standing upright on its 2 cloth legs, a physical impossibility. Lou, still deeply unsettled, continued to warn them. He hated the doll, sensing a deep-seated malevolence that the girls, in their pity, couldn't see. One night, he and Angie were planning a road trip, looking over maps spread out on the floor. Suddenly, From the next room, Donna's room, came the distinct sound of someone rustling and moving around. Cautiously, Lou crept to the closed door, listened, then threw it open. The room was empty. The Annabelle doll, which had been on Donna's bed, was now sitting in the corner, staring at him. As he stood there, a sudden, sharp pain exploded on his chest. It felt like he'd been clawed again. He stumbled back, clutching himself. But there was no one there. This time, there were no visible marks, just the searing pain and the chilling realization that whatever was in the apartment had attacked him again, this time while he was wide awake. The escalating and now physically aggressive phenomena led the roommates to seek another kind of help. They contacted a priest who, in turn, put them in touch with Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens were paranormal investigators, and upon their arrival, their assessment was immediate and grim. They examined the doll, the apartment, and listened to the accounts from Donna, Angie, and Lou. Lorraine, a clairvoyant, immediately sensed a presence far from the innocent child they believed it to be. This is not the spirit of a little girl, they stated according to their case files. It's an inhuman, demonic spirit. They explained that spirits don't possess objects, only people. This entity was using the doll as a conduit, a focal point for its activity, manipulating it to create the illusion of a haunting. Its goal was not to stay with the doll, but to eventually possess a human host. The Warrens requested a priest to perform an exorcism of the apartment, a blessing to cleanse the space, while skeptics, of course, dispute any demonic interpretation. The roommates reported an immediate sense of relief after the blessing. The oppressive atmosphere in the apartment seemed to lift, but the problem of the doll remained. Leaving it behind was not an option. The attachment was already formed. The Warrens decided the only safe solution was to remove it entirely. Ed carefully picked up the doll, intending to take it back with them. He carried it out to their car, placing it in the back seat. As he got behind the wheel and started the engine, the drive home began. But almost immediately, things went wrong. On the winding back roads, the engine began to sputter and cut out. The power steering failed, making the car nearly impossible to control. At one sharp curve, the brakes seemed to give way entirely, sending the car into a dangerous lurch. It was as if an unseen force was wrestling with them for control of the vehicle. Acting quickly, Ed pulled over, reached into his bag, and retrieved a vial of holy water. He sprinkled the water over the doll, reciting a prayer for protection. Almost instantly, the disturbances stopped. The rest of the drive was uneventful. As they finally pulled into their driveway, Ed turned to Lorraine, the doll sitting silently in the back. "We'll bring her somewhere safer." But as he said it, there was an understanding that safer was a very relative term. The road trip ends in Monroe, Connecticut. The Warrens' home isn't just a house. It's a place where the air itself seems to remember things, holding on to echoes of events long past. You can almost feel the weight of countless stories pressed into the very walls. Here, Ed Warren, a man whose hands were as skilled with wood as they were with warding off unseen forces, begins his work. He meticulously crafts a case of wood and glass, each joint measured, each plane smoothed with purpose. This isn't just a box, it's a vessel of containment. Inside, prayers are placed, scriptures are affixed, each one a spiritual lock on a supernatural door. The moment of enclosure is heavy, somber. There's no triumphant music, no sigh of relief. It's a pragmatic, necessary act, a recognition that some things can't be defeated, only contained. Lorraine Warren watches, her expression grave. She reiterates a warning she would give for years to come, her words echoing the core of their belief. The danger was never the doll itself. Annabelle was just an object, a conduit. The true threat was the inhuman spirit that had attached itself to her, using her as a bridge into our world. The doll was the keyhole, not the entity peering through it. The Warrens' Occult Museum grew around this centerpiece, becoming a library of dark lore. It's important here to draw a line between the Warrens' accounts and independently verified facts. They often told the story of a visiting priest who, filled with skepticism, picked up the Annabelle doll. Lorraine admonished him, warning him of the object's power. Later that day, the priest called, reporting a near-fatal car crash, his brakes having failed inexplicably. This is presented as their account, a cautionary tale. But there are no police reports or independent records to confirm it. Then there's the most famous story, the one that has been retold countless times. A young man, a motorcyclist, visited the museum with his girlfriend. He openly mocked the doll, laughing at the warnings and banging on the glass case, daring the spirit to do its worst. The story, as told by the Warrens, ends in tragedy. On the ride home, he lost control of his motorcycle and crashed into a tree, dying instantly. His girlfriend survived, but was hospitalized for over a year. Again, this is a powerful, chilling narrative, but it remains an allegation, a piece of the museum's lore, rather than a documented police case. The tone is sober, empathetic to the alleged loss, but it's crucial to maintain that this is a story passed down, not a proven event. But what about the people who started it all? Donna and Angie, the nursing students, tried to move on with their lives. They finished their studies, started their careers, yet the memory of those months never fully faded. The feeling of being watched, the sense of an unseen presence just at the edge of their vision, became a permanent part of their psychological landscape. Lou, Donna's friend, who had been so violently opposed to the doll, carried the scars too, both physical and emotional. The scratches on his chest healed, but the memory of the terrifying nightmares and the malevolent presence lingered. This brings us to a difficult, more human question. They had unwittingly given permission to something they couldn't possibly understand. They invited it into their home, their lives, and that permission had consequences. It forces us to sit with an unsettling ethical dilemma without needing to preach. If intense fear can manifest real physical harm, a person tripping down the stairs in a panic, a couple getting into a fight and crashing their car on the drive home, does the ultimate source of that fear even matter? Is a haunting defined by the ghost or by the terror it inspires in the living? The harm is real, regardless of the origin. Decades passed, and the story of Annabelle took on a new life, a new form of escalation, fame. With the release of the Conjuring films, the doll was canonized in pop culture, but the Annabelle on screen is a Hollywood invention, a chilling, porcelain-faced doll with a sinister grin. This cinematic prop is a work of fiction designed for maximum scares. The real Annabelle, the object that started it all, remains unchanged, a simple, Raggedy Ann doll, still sitting quietly behind the glass in Connecticut. The museum, once a niche destination for paranormal enthusiasts, became a pilgrimage site. A new generation of visitors, raised on the movie version, came to see the real thing. The atmosphere in the room is always taut, thick with a scent of old varnish, stale dust, and the quiet creak of wood expanding and contracting with the changing seasons. You can feel the collective energy of decades of fear and fascination concentrated in one small space. Hands hover inches from the glass, drawn by a morbid curiosity that battles with the stark, hand painted warning sign. Imagine the scene: a young visitor, a smirk playing on his lips, steps forward. He ignores the pleas of his girlfriend, who tugs nervously at his sleeve. He leans in close to the case, his breath fogging the glass for a second. The sign between them is simple, direct, and absolute. Do not open. He lifts his hand and, with a defiant grin, traces a slow circle on the glass with his fingertip, right over the doll's faded face. A caretaker watches silently from the doorway, his expression unreadable. The fingertip presses into the glass, a single point of contact between defiance and containment, and then it lifts. Have you ever noticed how some thresholds, once crossed, take something from you? You leave a place feeling heavier than when you arrived. Think of a tense quarrel in a quiet parking lot that ends not in resolution, but in a heavy, unnerving silence. That's the feeling people talk about when they leave the Warren's Occult Museum. It's a weight you carry with you. Remember the story of the motorcyclist from part 3? The one who challenged Annabelle and met a tragic end? In Monroe, Connecticut, that story is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a living legend. If you ask 10 different locals about it, you'll get 10 slightly different versions. One will say he crashed into a tree, another will insist it was a head on collision. The details shift, twisted by time and retelling. A perfect example of how oral history mutates. But the core warning remains the same, a stark reminder that what we choose to believe can fundamentally change what we do and what happens to us. As the years rolled on into the late 2010s, the museum itself began to fade from public view. Local zoning issues forced it to close its doors to regular tours, shrouding the collection in an even deeper aura of mystique and untouchability. But as the physical building grew more secluded, Annabelle's fame exploded in the digital world. The internet became a breeding ground for a strange cottage industry of fear. Haunted copycat dolls began appearing on auction sites. Self-proclaimed paranormal investigators live streamed from outside the closed museum gates. At the same time, a counter movement of skeptics gained traction. They created content mocking the doll, tapping on their screens as if testing the glass of her case, daring her to do something. It was a fascinating cultural moment, this digital tug of war between belief and disbelief. And it's easy to see the appeal of both sides, isn't it? The thrill of daring to challenge the darkness versus the deep-seated primal respect for a serious warning. Which side would you be on? And then came August 2020. The world was already holding its breath, locked down and glued to its screens. In the strange quiet of those days, a spark hit the dry tinder of the internet. It started small, a misunderstood interview, a single Wikipedia edit made as a joke, but it snowballed. Faster than anyone could track, a rumor caught fire and spread across the globe. Annabelle had escaped. Suddenly, she wasn't just a doll, in a museum in Connecticut. She was everywhere. The rumor surged through Twitter, with Annabelle trending worldwide. Mainstream news sites, desperate for clicks in a slow news cycle, picked up the story. Family group chats lit up with frantic messages. People who had never even heard of Monroe, Connecticut, felt a sudden, chilling need to check their closets, to glance over their shoulders in their own homes. The collective anxiety was palpable. It was no longer just a story, it was a global, participatory event. Panic as performance art, with the entire world as its stage. As the digital hysteria reached its peak, the one person who could quell the chaos stepped forward. Tony Spira, Ed and Lorraine Warren's son-in-law, and the current caretaker of the collection. He didn't issue a press release or go on a major news network. He did something much more direct, much more personal. He picked up his phone and started recording. He decided to provide proof of life for a doll. The video began simply. There are no dramatic sound effects, no spooky lighting, just Tony Spera walking down a hallway in his own home, which also houses the museum. He speaks plainly, his voice calm and steady, narrating his short journey to the infamous artifact. The tension isn't in what he says, but in the sheer ordinariness of it all. A man is walking down a hall to check on a doll while the rest of the world waits, convinced she's on the loose. Every footstep echoes in the quiet house, each one amplifying the suspense. The world is watching, waiting for something, anything, to move. He reaches the door to the museum room. The camera follows him in. It pans slowly across other artifacts, each with its own dark history, but the focus is clear. He moves toward a simple wooden and glass case, and there, his hand reaches out, the reflection of his fingers sliding over the glass. The small, familiar plaque on the front of the case gleams in the light. Warning, positively, do not open. The camera steadies, pushing in, until all we see is the pale porcelain face and the fixed, painted-on smile of the Annabelle doll staring out from behind the glass. So, after all the whispers, all the late-night searches, here is the truth. The Annabelle doll sits in a glass case at the Warren's Occult Museum in Connecticut. It hasn't moved. It hasn't escaped. It hasn't orchestrated some grand, terrifying breakout. The most dramatic thing that's happened is the online rumor mill spinning out of control. And maybe that's the most revealing part of this whole story. The anticlimax feels like a release, doesn't it? But it's also an indictment. The most dangerous thing in this room was never the doll. It was how fast a story can outrun the facts. Let's strip away the Hollywood gloss and the supernatural blockbuster franchise. For a moment, let's go back to the beginning, to that small apartment in 1970. Two young women, student nurses, who suddenly felt unsafe in their own home. Forget the levitating dolls and demonic contracts for a second and just focus on that core human feeling, the terror of being watched, the violation of your personal space, the feeling that something unseen has crossed a boundary without your consent, the deep, desperate longing to be believed when you say something is wrong, even if you can't quite explain it. It's important to be honest here. Many, many elements of the original Annabelle case are disputed. The records are thin where the legends are thick. Ed and Lorraine Warren's interpretations, their entire framework of demonology, are highly controversial and have been for decades. We don't have objective proof for most of what they claimed happened, But what we do have, what is undeniably real, is the impact. Those young women changed their behavior. They lost sleep. Their sense of control over their own lives was shattered. That fear was real. The actions they took because of that fear were real. The story they told and the way it was received changed them forever. And that's where the true climax of this story lies. It's not a jump scare. It's not a priest being thrown across a room. The real disaster is the chain reaction that ignites when fear, faith, and fame collide. You have scratches that may have been psychosomatic, a product of intense anxiety. You have motorcycle crashes that may have been tragic coincidences, later woven into the narrative to give it weight. You have choices made in a state of adrenaline fueled panic, choices that can't be undone. The doll itself, it just sits there. Its power isn't in what it does, but in what it reflects back at us. It's a mirror for our own anxieties, our beliefs, our need for a monster to explain the unexplainable. Its stillness is its greatest strength, which brings us back to the museum and that famous hand-painted warning, positively, do not open. The case hums with a profound silence now. The story has taken on a life of its own, far beyond the doll itself. Perhaps some doors are better left closed, not because a monster is waiting on the other side, but because the act of crossing the threshold of buying into the narrative completely is what turns us into just another part of the story. The real chilling image isn't the doll moving. It's a quiet room, a square of afternoon light falling on the glass, and a stitched smile that never had to move an inch to change the world outside its box. This is the kind of story we explore here. True disasters, where the collision of belief, pressure, and human psychology cracked lives open. If you want to hear more about the events that shook the world and whose echoes we still feel today, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.